make sure that that program doesn't contain controversial subjects, and you're not impolite to people.
No, definitely not, Dad. You know me. I'm never, ever controversial or impolite.
Yeah. Okay.
Welcome to Conversations with your lovable, never pisses anyone off, ex-Muslim host Aina, keeping it non-controversial. Welcome to panel 21 on Modi land, India. Wow, it's getting very Trumpy there lately. Today I'm joined by Ravi, my guest from my previous episode on the Hindu far right, and Professor of Marketing Gaurav Sabnis from New York. Gaurav has just returned from a 6-week stay in India, so I'm sure all the fashiness is fresh in his mind still. As always, dear listeners, if you enjoy the show, please consider supporting via Patreon or PayPal. Without you, shows like this can't survive. Now, let's dive right in. What the fuck is going on in India?
So what has been happening in India for the last 5.5 years since the Modi government came into power is a lot of stuff that almost makes Trump seem mild in comparison, which is that the government has just been continuously moving more and more to the right, like the fascist right, and like literally just taking each and every chapter out of their playbook.
And you're not exaggerating when you say the fascist right.
No, not at all. Like one of the first things Modi did in 2002, so we are talking almost 2 decades ago, when he came to power in his state, was rewrite textbooks in Gujarat to show that Hitler wasn't all bad. Like Hitler did some good stuff too. So like the textbooks in Gujarat before 2002 used to say very rightly that Hitler was all bad, and he came to power and said, no, Hitler was, he did bad stuff, but he did this good stuff too. So he comes from a party that literally 7-8 decades ago had ties with Hitler, and, they have been very pro-Nazi, pro-fascism in their origin. The Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, or the RSS as we call it.
Right. Yeah, I think, Ravi, you and I talked about their playing footsie with fascism in our last episode, right?
Yeah, we did spend a significant amount of time about that. So, yes, they were very openly pro-Nazism and fascism. Their whole organization was inspired by the fascist groups in Europe. All their leaders have praised Hitler and Mussolini and suggested that fascism is a model to follow in India. So, yeah, there's no ambiguity about any of that.
And they're in power. I mean, it sounds scary from here, especially being someone of Muslim background. Just watching the global dehumanization, just collectively everywhere, of Muslims, it's terrifying. I'm not even a believer, and it scares the shit out of me. It's started to become very anti-Muslim all over the place.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't think there's any way you can deny that. It's definitely, well, I guess the not just the anti-Muslim thing, but like far right populism has been on the rise globally. Actually, a lot of the stuff that people were talking about, with Trump, a lot of that happened a lot earlier in India, because remember, Modi came to power in 2014, so it was before Trump and the other waves of far right populism in Europe. And yeah, I mean, India has a very long history of Islamophobia, so it's not surprising that you're seeing a lot of the same stuff in India, but in fact, in a much worse and much more violent and brutal way. Right, and now with this new citizenship law, things are getting pretty violent there. When I heard about this, I was in awe. I was like, how can this be real? Like, they're putting this down in law. They're excluding Muslims. Like, I don't know, Gaurav, do you want to explain what the Citizenship Act is?
Sure. So the Citizenship Amendment Act, what was the Citizenship Amendment Bill, and then it became an act. So, what it says is that if you are somebody from Afghanistan, Bangladesh, or Pakistan who is essentially, if you are from Afghanistan, Bangladesh, or Pakistan, and you're not a Muslim, then you get a shortcut to becoming a citizen through the refugee route in India. So, like on paper, it just seems like a small shortcut for these small minorities, but taken holistically with all the other things that are going on in India, with the national citizenship registration and other things,
And what's that? The
it is.
National Citizenship Registration?
So they started off with this thing in a state called Assam, which borders Bangladesh, where because there was a lot of people going back and forth through the border between the two states of Assam and between Bangladesh, they set in place a mechanism in which you have to sort of prove your citizenship using documents, etc. Because it was a codification of the papers please attitude, and this has been going on since 1971 when Bangladesh separated from Pakistan.
Mm-hmm.
So it was on books for 4 decades, but it's only in the last few years that the Indian government started doing this. And this new government said they are now going to implement it all over the country, which means that you're basically going to be guilty until proven innocent. So unless you prove to the government that you are a citizen, you will be treated as a non-citizen.
Wow.
And that's how it started in Assam, and now it is going to be implemented all over the country. And you take that in conjunction with this bill, which says that as long as you're not a Muslim, but you're born after 1971, but born before 2014 in these states, you're fine. It just
so it's
creates
like
a really horrible situation.
the Citizenship Act is like a path to fast tracking citizenship for refugees of minorities that are fleeing religious persecution from countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan, but non-Muslims. And to have that,
Yeah, and for the first time, it says not Muslims. Yeah.
right, it's like pretty blatant. And they continue to claim that no one needs to worry, that it's not anti-Muslim. It's only for people that are persecuted. I mean, as if Muslims aren't persecuted, right? In a country like India, they're persecuted. So how do you not imagine that someone like an Ahmadi Muslim might be fleeing as well?
Yeah. Also, if I can go back for a second to the NRC that was implemented in Assam, it actually gets even more blatant when you think about that. So the reason it was implemented there is because there's been like sort of waves of Assamese ethno-nationalism for a while now, and they've been concerned about the immigration of Bengalis. It's more of an ethnic thing than a religious thing there. So they've always had a significant Bengali minority population and also a large degree of immigration. So the NRC was really implemented with, and the BJP did that in Assam. But what they realized was that when it was actually implemented and when they went through the whole process of getting people's documentation, they realized that a lot of people who would end up losing their citizenship would actually be Bengali Hindus, right? So, of course, the BJP can have that.
So just explain for the audience what the BJP is, who they are.
Oh, right. So the BJP is the Hindu nationalist party that's currently in power. They came to power in 2014. And then they won the elections again in 2019.
Good times.
Yes. So yeah, they implemented this NRC in Assam, and it turned out that a significant number of people who would end up becoming illegal immigrants and lose their citizenship status were Bengali Hindus, which of course the BJP wouldn't want that to happen. So it's at that point that they implemented the Citizenship Amendment Bill. Mm-hmm. So that way the Hindus get to remain citizens, whereas they can still get rid of all the Muslims.
Nice.
So it's when you look at the history, it becomes even more blatant. There's just there's no way you can deny that this was designed specifically to exclude Muslims.
But of course they're denying it, right?
Yes, yeah. Their whole line is that it's about people fleeing religious persecution, which, first of all, why is it just religious persecution and not other forms of like political persecution, and which of course also happens in these states. And even if, as you guys have both pointed out, there are persecuted Muslim groups in all of these countries as well. But of course, they're not going to get the citizenship fast track that the non-Muslims will. So yeah, I mean, of course, they're going to push the whole propaganda about how it's just about helping minorities fleeing persecution, but just look under the surface and it's obvious that it's very specifically designed to exclude Muslims.
So tell me if I'm wrong, but the way that I see it, the rhetoric of them denying it seems very IDW-esque, right? Like it's kind of a gaslighty, pretending to be more moderate. Like when it comes to Trump, he's pretty blatant and stupid. In a way, that seems less threatening to me when someone is open about their bigotry. Then you know what you're up against. But when someone is trying to couch it in all kinds of ways, pretend that it's secular and liberal, then just about, no, this is just about, protecting other minorities or something like that, it seems a lot more frightening because it has the opportunity to get some respect, right? It can grow and fester in even like socially acceptable circles.
Yeah, I mean, they are trying to couch it in more secular or IDW terms, but I don't think anybody's buying it because they themselves are having trouble sticking to it. Like Prime Minister Modi himself said that you can tell the people who oppose this act based on the way they dress.
Jesus.
And the reference being that in his mind, like Indian Muslims dress a certain way. So people opposing this have been, wearing different clothes just to show him how just openly bigoted he's being in that way. So even though they are trying to talk out the both sides of their mouth, it's like it's the thinnest pretense now.
Talk to me a bit about the protests that were going on. Were you there when that was happening?
I did attend a couple of protests. So I was in Pune and Mumbai mostly, and a lot of the way these protests are going depends on which party's government is ruling that particular state.
Mm-hmm.
And as it happens, Mumbai and Pune are ruled currently by a party that used to be aligned with the BJP, but as of just 2 months ago, went in the opposite direction. So they were okay letting these protests happen. So all the protests I attended were very peaceful. But there have been protests in Delhi and a few other states which have been really brutally clamped down by the police
and some in
the ruling government, just arrests in a lot of places for doing nothing.
Right, in Muslim universities, right?
Yeah, right. With Muslims and Dalits both. And in Uttar Pradesh, in Lucknow, which has a larger Muslim population than most of the country, so there also they have been clamped down on. And these protests have been going on since about more than 6 weeks now. And it has led to, I think, the first really broad-based opposition to this government coming from an organic civil society way. So in the last 6 years, that's why I think the right wing is really shocked because they have not seen it until now.
Mm-hmm.
In this big of a way.
And what kinds of things were the police doing in these protests?
So they used tear gas. There was a firing. There was what is in India called a lathi charge, which is they just take these big wooden sticks and beat up people to make them do what. People have been arrested. So there was this one guy who was arrested without bail. His name is Chandrasekhar Azad. He's part of a party that represents the Dalit and Muslim alliance, and he just literally gave a speech and posted on social media or something, and they arrested him. And in his bail petition, the government said we cannot share what we arrested him for because it has a national security implication. Like that is the most bizarre thing ever.
I'd also add that there have been several deaths as well. I can't remember like the number off the top of my head. I don't know if you know, but I mean the last time I checked it was definitely like more than 20, but it's probably even more now. Yeah, so this is it's pretty bad.
And this is all from protesting the citizenship law, right?
So yes, it definitely began as a protest against the citizenship law and also against the NRC, which we were talking about earlier. But the sense I get, and I'm not the best person to talk about this because I've not been on the ground, so you probably have a better view of this. But my understanding is that it's sort of developing into something broader, right? So it's against the current government as a whole, rather than just these two specific recent sort of implementations. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure. It has definitely, it started off that way, but it has become like a broad-based protest against what the government is doing. And even if you look at all the signs over there or the speeches made, it is essentially a protest against this government's fascism or bigotry. And like what they have done with these two bills or these two acts is just something that represents the pinnacle of their bigotry. So it's kind of appropriate that this is what has led to people coming out and pushing back against what is happening. But honestly, I'm very pessimistic about what is happening anyway, but it's a good thing for sure. But I'm still pessimistic.
What's the general sense you got from being there and speaking to people? Like, was there still a lot of support for the BJP?
It mirrors the US in a lot of ways, in the sense that people who supported the BJP are still mostly supporting the BJP. So, and social media and especially apps like WhatsApp and Facebook play a big part of it, in that they have their their yarn machines or their propaganda machines going. So a lot of people I speak to and still justify this act and all the violence and everything, saying, "Oh, it's for the greater common good. It is patriotic. It is nationalistic." So that is part of why I'm pessimistic, in the sense that I don't see it changing the landscape, at least in the short term. Hopefully, it'll change the political landscape in the long term. But this party came back to power with almost a two-thirds majority just 6 months ago. So democratically, I don't really see what can change things. It's like if Trump got reelected and also won the Senate with a filibuster-proof majority and also won the House by 60%. It's kind of like what that is what happened in India. So.
And do you think Trump is going to win?
Wow. Yeah, that's a whole different level of pessimism. I hope not. I don't. I'm much less pessimistic about the US than I am about India. Let's put it that way.
What do you say, Ravi?
So yes, I definitely share the pessimism here. Things are way worse in India than the U.S. And I think we've spoken about this before, but I'd say that of all like the established major democracies, that if any of them are at real risk of slipping into full-on fascism, then India is probably the closest. But I will say that like these protests that have emerged are cause for some, however, mitigated optimism, because honestly I didn't even expect this to happen. I thought like that sort of Indian society has just completely gone over to Hindu nationalism, and there's just any opposition that exists is so tiny that there's really nothing that can happen in the short term. But the fact that these sort of mass protests have erupted all over the country, and it really is a sort of pan-Indian phenomenon, I would say. So a lot of the protests that get a lot of attention are the ones that happen in the urban centers, but a lot of the small towns, a lot of the sort of impoverished regions of India, the Muslim majority regions, all of them have been protesting, although they don't get as much coverage as sort of the big urban centers and the universities. But yeah, it really is a sort of large-scale pan-Indian phenomenon at this point, which I think is a cause for some optimism.
Right. That is something.
Yeah, so the rot isn't complete. So there's some hope, I would say.
But surely you guys aren't going to burst my bubble that Bollywood, the hub of art and creativity, it's got to be super progressive and speaking out about this stuff, right?
Yeah, this is where, as much as we like to kind of criticize Hollywood, and there's plenty to criticize, at least Hollywood is, kind of progressive and is predominantly anti-Trump, whereas Bollywood, as far as I know, has completely just fallen in line with Hindu nationalism, or just generally are showing no signs of opposing Modi. The last I checked, I mean, there have been more recent developments with the protests, but as far as I know, Bollywood is pretty much marching in step with Hindu nationalism.
Oh, you had to burst my bubble there.
Yeah, yes, sorry to burst your bubble, but yeah, I'll completely agree with Ravi. And it's not a new thing. I think Bollywood has just traditionally been more right of center because India's elite are roughly right of center, and Bollywood itself has gotten more and more privileged in the sense that most of the people ruling Bollywood right now are second, third, or even fourth generation film stars from entrenched families in
Mm,
the industry, as opposed to Hollywood, which is still mostly people, who worked as waiters or did this or waiters or waitresses and kind
mm-hmm.
of came up the hard way. Bollywood just comes from a place of privilege, which has made it even more right of center than it used to be. So yeah, even with these protests, sadly, either they are silent or there are a few, of course. Like I have a couple of friends from Mumbai who are in there, and there is the unofficial anthem of the protest is called Kagaz Nahi Dikhayenge, which literally means we'll not be showing you our papers, because what they have is a papers please law, and that Kagaz Nahi Dikhayenge is something written by a Bollywood scriptwriter and lyricist called Varun Grover.
I know
So
that name.
yeah, so he's like very progressive, but he's one of the few minority voices within Bollywood. Most of Bollywood is sadly very much in lockstep with these right wingers.
And that's so sad. Like, as an, I suppose, outsider perspective, right? As a Pakistani, I grew up, when I was little, certainly I used to watch a lot more Bollywood movies. And I just never imagined that these people that I admired would be these horrible status quo warriors. And it's so disappointing, especially because some really big names are of Muslim background, right? There's Amir Khan, Salman Khan, Shah Rukh Khan, and all those. Um, and then what do? They tweet out pictures of themselves with Modi. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah. So one thing I will say is just there may be a misconception among some of your listeners here is that so Bollywood is, at least outside India, is usually used to refer to Indian cinema as a whole, but in India it usually just means the Hindi film industry.
Ah, yes,
So
right.
I think you will for a lot of like the southern film industry,
Which is
for
also
Tamil.
massive, right?
Yes, which is also massive. But I think you'll find that the actors there are probably more, generally more progressive, or if not progressive, at least not completely in support of the stuff that's going on and completely in support of Hindu nationalism. So the states in the deep south are usually been not too have usually been opposed to Hindu nationalism.
And why is that, do you think, the difference?
It's a long story. So there's it depends. So you're going to have to look at it on a state by state basis. But so Kerala has not only does it have a large Christian and Muslim minority, so it makes it harder for Hindu nationalism to rise to power there. But they've always had a strong communist presence. So they've generally been, and communists, of course, have always been have been deadly enemies of the Hindu nationalists.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Congress is also pretty strong in Kerala. So far, the Hindu nationalists have not risen to power there, and I don't think they will anytime soon. So I'm pretty sure that if you look at the film industry there, for example, most of the actors are going to oppose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's been disappointing from Bollywood, the most mainstream and big Muslim background names. They haven't really said anything. And
I should add though that at least two of these three big names, which is Amir Khan and Shah Rukh Khan, have spoken in the past about how they worry about the right word.
And then there was controversy, right? There was major controversy around it. Their statements were really mild, right? Something like, oh, we just worry about the sentiments rising in this country, or something like that.
Yeah, right. Like their things were just generally about how in the last few years things are getting, because both of them are married to Hindu women, so their children are half Muslim, half Hindu. So, they were just expressing themselves in a very polite, not at all strident way about way things are changing, but the right wing has gotten so shrill that they were shouted down, painted as anti-nationalists,
Hmm.
etc. So
And then their
maybe
loyalties were
probably a
like,
reason.
called into question, right?
Yeah,
Some really
exactly.
nasty stuff. So I guess part of that is fear, fear
Yeah,
of
shrill
losing your
movement.
career or whatever. But even still, I find it shocking that there could be so much silence at a time like this, especially from people
Yeah,
with big platforms.
yeah, that definitely has been disappointing. And a few names have spoken up or tried to speak up or even just stand literally silently, like Deepika Padukone, who's a pretty one of the top female actors in Bollywood right now. But she just showed up for a protest, and immediately the right wing wolves came down and just started like vilifying her and everything. So yeah, it's full on 1930s Germany happening in India right now. Even the smallest thing you say against the government is just painted in the most bizarre ways that you can imagine, and that's why those 6 weeks felt like 66 weeks in India, because I just it was just a daily, day in and day out, hour in and hour out barrage of fascism.
Yeah, that sounds horrifying. And how is it like with I guess childhood friends and stuff? So I imagine that you've lived away in the US for a while and they've been there, and when you guys meet up again, is it strange? Like, are they starting to support things that you're shocked by, or?
Yes, the one my childhood friends in India much more so are in support of the right wing government than I would have expected to be. And it is still civil, so it's not like we are just yelling at each other. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that reaches a point even within civil disagreement where I'm like, oh, okay. And then we just start discussing something else because these are people I grew up with. So, like
Yeah.
beyond the point, yeah, there's not much I can do. But yeah, much more so the folks I know back in India are pro right wing than, let's say, the Indian diaspora I know in the US. Not to say that Indian diaspora in the US is uh, necessarily progressive or anything like that. There's definitely a huge pro Modi element here as well. But at
Hey,
least within
remember
my
that
own immediate circle.
that rally, that Howdy Modi rally? Was it in Texas?
Oh,
It was massive. Oh,
Houston.
does that mirror your experiences too, Ravi? Like with people that you've known?
I think my experiences have been a little bit more positive. A lot of people, well, one of the things I've noticed is, especially now, a lot of people who were previously just politically disengaged or completely
Hmm.
apolitical have actually started. And that would be most of, the friends that I know in India are just completely apolitical. Significant number of them are now sort of participating in the protests, or at least generally seem to be in solidarity with the protests. Although they're definitely, I wouldn't say that's the case with all the people I know in India. So I also think it's a generational thing. At least
Hmm.
what I've observed, the diaspora in the U.S. is that the more recent immigrants and also the older people generally seem to be more pro Modi and pro Hindu nationalism than the younger folks. That's been my experience. I think the diaspora as a whole, the younger people are on the whole more progressive than their counterparts in India.
I mean, that's what I would think is a general thing across the board, but then you see things like Quillette becoming popular and Paul Joseph Watson and garbage like that, and that really terrifies me, is when far right and right wing bullshit is uh, kind of given a facelift for young people to rediscover and think that they're kind of doing something counterculture and oh.
Yeah, I mean, just to take a slight tangent into US politics, and like you said, I'm a professor and I've been dealing with teaching young people for over a decade now. And the worrying thing has been that what used to be just an assumption, at least in the Northeast US, was that most students are liberal. in the last 4 or 5 years not so much being the default assumption. I still think most students of mine in the Northeast are liberals, but there's a lot more louder expression and acceptance of the right wing thought that is very disturbing. But yeah.
Yeah, so you're telling me that, SJWs aren't going around whipping professors on campuses? Is this
I
true?
wish. Yeah, I wish. I wish. Yeah.
I mean, poor professors aren't, and white people generally aren't like shaking in their boots from entering a university campus.
Yes, obviously not. And I think we have talked about that on Twitter, that is just such a completely fake news kind of narrative, and people pushing it usually have never stepped foot in a campus or never actually talked to anybody in academia, and usually it's a couple of professors with access to grind that are pushing this completely false narrative. But yes, that is a completely different tangent that we can go
Yeah.
into in some other discussion, I guess.
Yeah.
To draw a connection, a lot of the demonization of academia is a thing in India as well. I mean, it's not surprising because it's just a classic sort of far right trip. Intellectuals are always demonized in these movements, so it's not surprising.
Yeah, intellectuals and higher education and ideas that they don't agree with. As ironic as it is that their whole thing is that the left is silencing ideas that they don't agree with, when actually you hear about how bad and dangerous the Muslims are all the time. You hear about, skull shapes and race and IQ now. I don't see it being silenced.
I just want to add one fact, one very creepy, disturbing fact for your listeners, which is that there have been a couple of universities in India that have traditionally been more, politically opinionated, as have been their students, like the JNU, the Jawaharlal Nehru University, or Aligarh Muslim
Those are
University.
the ones that had the
So,
big protests.
yeah, so those have had the protests, and that has been happening for a while. A big shift this time was a university called JMU, which is the Jamia Millia Islamia University, which is not at all a traditionally political or even a traditionally Muslim university. It just has a name that sounds very Muslim if you don't know about that university. It's like Jamia Millia Islamia, right? Like you hear that name and you start, if you don't know anything about India or about politics in India, you hear that name and you start thinking about like ISIS or Al Qaeda, but it's just any other
I wouldn't
university.
jump from.
Like Saint
Yeah.
Xavier's is no more a Catholic university. It's something like that. The
Yeah.
Jamia Millia Islamia is not at all a Muslim university, but because it has that name, that is where they sent in the cops, and that is where they beat up students. And part of the reason why this became such a big news story is that students there and faculty there were shocked, because it has never been a university on radar as being a very activist university. It was just a university doing its usual stuff, but the government decided, oh, you have a Muslim name, so we are going to send in cops and we are going to beat up your faculty and your students. And that kind of is one of the things that push these protests even above and beyond what used to happen, because people who live in that city know that this is crossing a whole new level of bigotry or fascism.
Right, and I'm sure all the people who talk about, people being silenced on university campuses were all about this. Surely this was the topic of discussion in IDW forums, right? Like all the anti-SJWs were right on this case, right?
Yeah. Again, I wish.
Oh,
I wish.
Just crickets, I suppose, then.
Completely.
I mean, how much attention does the IDW pay to India? I
mean,
guess that would,
when it's in their favor. I mean, did you not hear? Not India, but when anything that's outside of the North America sphere is something that they want to cash in on or capitalize on or just draw from. Do you remember the clip of Rubin mispronouncing Bolsonaro's name and talking about how at least he's going to get rid of the SJW stuff from universities?
Yes, I do remember that. Yeah, that's a good point. The police brutality is pretty amazing. That not just university students, but as I was talking about before, a lot of these really it's these impoverished Muslim majority regions where they've been just absolutely brutal. I think one thing that sometimes gets left out in these discussions that is not just the cops. It's usually the cops working with mobs of Hindu nationalist organizations. And in one of these universities, it was the student wing of the Hindu nationalist party that did committed a lot of the violence. And a lot of these mobs target these Muslim majority regions. And the cops usually either turn a blind eye to what's going on or actively support the violence that's happening, which, again, since we keep drawing these parallels to European fascism in the 30s, you could see similar things happening there as well. The black shirts and the brown shirts were either, the police either turned a blind eye or actively supported them, usually when they went on these rampages.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's something that when we talk about the police brutality, we shouldn't leave out the fact that there's a lot of these mobs and non-state organizations participating in this as well.
Yeah,
non-state and at the same time quasi-state. So like bodies like the ABVP or RSS, kind of like quasi-state when their party is in power.
And do you think this kind of blind eye turning happens in things like beef lynchings as well?
Oh, absolutely. I have no doubt that it happens all over the place.
That's terrifying, honestly.
Yeah.
I can't remember where I saw, but there was like a poll of what Indian police, of what Indian cops believe, and they, unsurprisingly, was revealed that they're, significantly more right wing than I guess the average. Many of them have openly bigoted views towards Muslims. Think Muslims are more prone to crime than others, and so on. And a lot of them are very obviously supporters of Hindu nationalism, or at least sympathetic to it. So yes, they definitely turn a blind eye to a lot of what goes on, if not, like I said, actively support some of the stuff.
Isn't that great to hear that these people are in positions of authority and power?
Yeah, it's kind of tragic that it's not just the people in positions of state power. It's that the thing to understand about the RSS, and this, not just the RSS, but this whole constellation of sort of Hindu nationalist organizations, is that they've spent decades sort of penetrating civil society, right? They have like schools and educational centers, clubs, charitable societies, even federations of trade unions that have been like on the ground working in different parts of India for decades. So this whole victory of the BJP isn't something that just sort of happened out of nowhere. It was building up for a long time.
Right.
And that's the other thing, is that the sort of authoritarianism that you're seeing in India is not just something that's sort of being imposed from the top down, which is the case in a lot of right-wing dictatorships. If that were the case, it would actually be less frightening. The thing about Hindu nationalism that makes it really parallel to the classical fascism of Italy and Germany was that you have a genuinely mass base for what's going on. You have a party of committed nationalists who are working to transform civil society, not just government, but civil society, to mobilize people and to sort of enforce their sort of vision, their fascist vision, all across society. So it's a genuine mass movement that is, that's penetrating all of civil society, and has been doing so for decades. So it was just a question of opposing an authoritarian government. It will be a lot easier, a lot less concerning. But the rot goes much deeper here.
And it's ironic because this is what you hear from Indians as criticism of Pakistan, right? Like all the time. That there's so much intolerance and state-sanctioned bigotry, and we're so much better than this, and we're a liberal democracy, we're secular, but no, not at all anymore at all, it seems.
Yeah, not even close.
No, and it's, when they complain about Pakistan or Saudi Arabia, it's less that we are better than them, but more in the sense of why can't we be more like them? So like the unstated goal seems to be to make India into a Hindu version of Saudi Arabia, not even
Gosh.
Pakistan, but more like a Hindu version of Saudi Arabia. Like, why don't you stop them there? So like, if I post, let's say, a picture of a steak on my Twitter, people are like, why don't you go to Saudi Arabia and post a picture of pork chops? Like, that is
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
literally the attitude they have.
That's very much an IDW tactic, right? Oh, why are you speaking out for gay
Exactly.
rights here? Why don't you go to Saudi Arabia and wear this t-shirt? Or, oh, you think you're all big and feminist over here. Why don't you go to Saudi Arabia and do this protest and wear a pussy hat there? It's like, what the fuck? I mean, we all understand why things are bad in Saudi Arabia. Why can we not speak out where we want to speak out? Like, why is that used as a silencing tactic?
Yeah, completely. And sadly, in India, it comes more. A lot of it also comes from a place of they actually want that to happen, as opposed to just a silencing tactic. So
Yeah, they seem like they're
yeah,
jealous that they cannot treat minorities in that way or women in that way.
yeah,
They won't
yeah,
say it like that, of course, but it does seem to come from
yeah.
like they don't. It's not that they oppose Saudi Arabia's brand of extreme conservatism, it's that they want to install their own brand of extreme
Right.
conservatism. They oppose what's slightly different from them, not because based on principle of being against that kind of thing, but because it's not
Mhm.
their brand.
The line that you hear from them all the time is there are so many officially Muslim states, countries all over the world. Why can't we just have one for Hindus? If Muslims can do it, so can we. That's a constant line that you hear from them. So yes, the goal is an authoritarian ethno state. There's no doubt about that.
Right, but they
So when they
criticize Pakistan for being a state that came into existence based on religion all the time.
Yeah, but the criticism is followed up with, well, if you can do it, so can we.
So then you don't really think it's that bad, right?
Well, it's only bad because you're doing it. That's
Right.
that's that's basically it. It's just pure tribalism and nothing. There's no principle. There's no underlying principle. Yeah. It's just you can do it. We can do it too.
Ugh. I mean, I just feel so hopeless, guys. I don't even know what can be done or what can be said to combat this kind of thing. Being someone of Muslim background, of Pakistani background, seeing how so many of these people supported me speaking out against Saudi Arabia and Pakistan and extreme far right views over there, and how all these types of people would applaud me and, embrace me. And the second that critical lens is turned based on principle outwards, like, okay guys, this is not cool happening in the West, like, why aren't you speaking out against it? I thought you were with me, right, when I was speaking out against this happening to minorities in Pakistan. It's just it falls apart so quickly when you're in my position to see how they champion the rights of women from Saudi Arabia. But I'm a woman who came from Saudi Arabia, not my rights, because I speak out against the Western right immediately. If I'm not treated in the same way that, say, someone like Ayan Hirsi Ali would be. Even though I'm an ex-Muslim woman, I do have plenty of criticisms of Islam, but I also have criticisms of the Western far right.
Yeah. Yes. Although, like, since we've had such a depressing discussion so far, one note of positivity is that all these protests in India, mostly they have leaders that are female, and I think this is the first time I've seen that happen in India. So the biggest ongoing protest in Delhi is in a place called Shaheen Bagh, which is all led by Muslim women.
Hmm.
And most of the visible and the loudest voices or personalities leading these protests are women, and there have also been a lot of social media videos from women protesting against the government and fighting against the cops, etc. Because at least some cops have the old chivalry or whatever, not to beat up women. So many times women will form a chain around their male
Mm.
companions who are protesting just to stop them from police brutality. And so, yeah, like, this is, I think, the first time in my life in India that I've seen a public movement that is led completely or something like 90% by female leaders.
Hmm. Yeah, that's something. That's a good point. Gaurav, I wanted to talk to you. I remember writing this thread on Twitter about discovering how a friend of mine was like a closet Trump supporter, and the way that she kind of dropped it in conversation. Didn't ever admit to it, of course, but it was very much like, oh, I'm just playing devil's advocate. I'm just trying to look at things from both sides. I'm not supporting, no, but then any criticism that was put forth to her, the goalposts were dodged. When it was like about him being a sexual predator, it was like, yeah, but what about other men in powerful positions? What about other presidents? But we're not talking about them. I'm talking about Trump right now. Yeah, fuck those people too. When it was about his anti-immigrant rhetoric, it was like, yeah, but what about his actual policies? What about the Muslim ban? Yeah, but then it was goalpost shifting again. It was like, but economically, he's done really well. When facts were presented about that, it was like, oh, but these sources are too left-wing. Any source for anything was too left-wing. So it was this whole gaslighty, dishonest, again, I hate to say it, but very IDW-esque, Rubin-esque, I'm not supporting him, but yeah, fuck yeah, you are. When I brought up the fact that he couldn't condemn the KKK, there was no like, oh yeah, that's bad. The immediate reaction was, I'd have to see what context that was in, and what about, were other people asked this question about condemning the KKK? And it was just gross. It was so gross. So yeah, I saw that you related to that on Twitter in an Indian context. So I just wanted you to talk to me a bit more about that.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And this, at least in my immediate circles, it happens to me a lot more in India than it happens to me. Like, I live in the most, I guess, the nicest liberal bubble living in Manhattan in the US. So I don't interact with as many Trump fans. But yeah, whenever I go back to India with Modi, it is exactly like this. So there'll be some people who are out and out supportive of him, but even now, those who don't support him, many of them will do exactly this, where you start you go beyond two or three lines and it's about what about the Congress government, and Congress was the opposition party, so not like the US Congress, but the party that you ruled India for a while, that used to be left of center. But yeah, it is that thing. And one line I often use is, since we were talking about Bollywood earlier, is was this very famous line by Amitabh Bachchan where he's like, जाओ पहले उस आदमी का साइन लेकर आओ जिसने मेरे हाथ में ये लिख दिया था. And the story being that somebody was mean to him as a kid and somebody tattooed something nasty on his arm as a kid, and then this guy becomes a criminal and he just uses that as an excuse. Like, if you're calling me a criminal, go and ask that person who was mean to me as a kid. And
Oh gosh.
that's the line I always use, like the most frequent tactic of either outright Modi supporters or even just centrists pretending to be centrists, but who are actually Modi supporters, is kind of that. Like, go and ask Congress, go and ask the old communists, go and ask, like they'll never actually talk about their own government, which has been in power for now 6 years, and in some states for over 20 years. They'll just want to deflect. And one friend came out and explicitly said at the end of an argument, yeah, you can only talk to us after 60 years because the previous party ruled for almost 60 years. So as long as 60 years don't pass, you should not criticize this government. Okay, what the fuck? I'll be dead in 60 years, probably.
Wow.
So I'm going to criticize them now.
Yeah, it's just whataboutery.
Yeah.
Constantly, and gaslighting. It's really frustrating to have that conversation. It's like kind of the Quillette thing, right? Of, oh, these are not Nazis. Real Nazis were in 1930s Germany. And it's like real Nazis killed people in gas chambers. So it's like you don't say anything until we get to that point. But I mean, it's horrifying. I don't even know what to say to that tactic.
And the sad part is, like in the last few years, I've read a few books from actual 1930s Germany, and this is exactly how things were happening there.
Right.
It wasn't. Yeah, this is exactly how they would justify these things until it got too late. I know this person is not all bad. Just one or two things are bad. Like
Mm-hmm.
Goebbels is a very articulate, smart person. He's a PhD and things like that. So like, it's following the same track
Mm-hmm.
in India, in the US, in Brazil, in the UK. We're just going down that same road again. This time with the power of social media.
Which is, yeah, which is such an amplifying factor, right? It's scary how quickly things can accelerate with that power behind them. What say you, Ravi?
Social media is really that, especially the far right in India have adapted remarkably well to it. So there's a constant stream of propaganda that really, I've actually seen people who are, again, completely apolitical, but slowly turn into these Hindu nationalist zombies after exposure to that kind of propaganda on social media. So yeah, social media really does amplify bigotry in ways that you wouldn't expect, but yeah, it does happen. And I'm not sure what we can do apart from sort of counter propaganda. There's really nothing else you can do, right? You can't shut it down entirely.
Right.
Social media has always been a valuable tool for dissenting voices as well. So all we can do is push back.
Mm-hmm. But always, doesn't it seem like fighting for the status quo is always going to have much more power behind it than fighting against it?
Yeah. Where dissenters are always going to face an uphill battle. Conditions are always going to be positioned against them. But what can you do but keep fighting, really?
Yeah, unless you want to lay down and take it, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you either just give up and let it happen, or you take a stand.
This conversation is getting so depressing.
Yeah.
Can we talk about something fun for a second? What can we say? What can we talk about in terms of India? Nothing fun going on there these days.
I don't know. Like
the food is still pretty good.
Yes, this is true. This is true. I mean, I haven't been to India, but I totally believe you when you say the food is pretty good. It looks damn good. Of course, Pakistani biryani is better, but I hope I won't be canceled now.
all biryani is beautiful.
Really? You think so?
Well, I'm just trying to be neutral here and not get canceled by anyone.
Biryani centrist.
Yes.
Get the fuck out of here, you centrist.
Biryani centrist.
You can't be a biryani centrist. You gotta pick a side. I'll tell you something though. Biryani that doesn't have potatoes in it is nonsense. Now I'm totally gonna get canceled.
What? Yes, you are cancelled. Yes. Blocking, reporting, canceling.
You're gonna get off this call with me and block immediately. I mean, no, though. I don't eat much meat, so when there's biryani without potatoes, there's nothing in there for me. It's very sad.
All right. Okay, then you will really like this thing in India called vegetarian biryani, which a lot of people want to cancel from the other side. But yeah.
Yes, I have heard of this vegetarian biryani before. But tell me this. Tell me about the term non-veg. I heard you venting. Well, I saw you venting about it on Twitter recently. Like, as a non-Indian, this wouldn't strike me as an obnoxious term, but the way that you were describing it, it was interesting.
Yeah, so in India, even though majority Indians are not vegetarians, the dominant Brahminical culture is such that vegetarianism has a virtue associated with it that goes beyond just what we see in the West, which is about ethics or environmentalism, etc. In India, it's more like, oh, this is the right way of doing things, and if you are not a vegetarian, then you're like evil, impure, dirty, etc. So it's almost like it's attached to that. So in India, a restaurant will be described as a vegetarian restaurant or a non-vegetarian restaurant. So the default assumption is that vegetarian is normal, so non-vegetarian is abnormal or something that needs to be pointed out. And that's just something we grow up with in India. And it's only much later that I realized that it has casteist or bigoted implication, where restaurant is pure vegetarian, as in being vegetarianism is being pure. And it comes from casteism, it comes from Brahmanism. So I said that this time when I went to India, I said there is food and then there is vegetarian food. So I tried to stick to that.
So you're trying to normalize like
Yeah.
non-vegetarian food that is considered impure, basically.
Yeah, yeah, and from the fringes or from the outside, it just seems pedantic. But since the right wing came to power, they have gotten rid of eggs from school lunches
Mm-hmm.
in the state-run schools. And India is a country where a lot of the diet is primarily vegetarian. So eggs are a source of protein for,
Mm-hmm.
lower-income kids who go to school and only have school lunches. So like these things have practical implications
Mm-hmm.
where this attaching a virtue to vegetarianism is actually affecting people's nutrition and people's well-being, and the the epitome of that is of course the beef related lynchings.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I'm always interested in hearing Ravi's perspective on vegetarianism in India as a not Hindu nationalist vegan that he is.
Yeah, we spoke about this a little,
We
I think,
did,
towards the
yeah.
end of the last podcast, and I agree with everything that Gaurav said. That vegetarianism in India, by and large, is not progressive. It's based in notions of ritual purity, and handling meat and animals has always been seen as ritually impure, which is why vegetarianism is usually associated with with the dominant castes. So yes, it's a caste-based ritual purity thing. That's what vegetarianism is in India. So yeah, I mean, you can be vegan or vegetarian in India and still acknowledge that vegetarianism is not a progressive thing in India.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm willing to do that.
And so, what do you think of the term non-veg?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it makes sense that when you see vegetarianism as sort of the normal, the virtuous, the pure, then you would want to say, oh, this is non-vegetarian. So you know the impure places to avoid. So that's just
impure places to avoid. Yeah,
I mean, that's literally what it is. That's how these people see these things. It's not just out of an ethical concern for animals, right? It's about avoiding impure spaces for the upper castes. So yeah, that's really the basis of the label non-vegetarian, which also explains why you don't really see that anywhere else. Everywhere else, it's when you have something vegetarian that you actually point out that, oh, okay, this stuff is vegetarian or vegan.
Like, yeah, to me,
that's not the default.
I think of it as a more inclusive and diverse, something that people are considerate to have an option of. But I never think of it as like the ruling class, the status quo, and associated with purity and superiority. So it's interesting. You're totally right. Of course, in different contexts, these things mean different things, and that's what's so interesting. On that note, we've had a very long and depressing conversation about India. We livened it up a little bit with the Biryani debate. Anything else you guys want to add?
All I would say is to the listeners is anything they can do to kind of support and amplify the protests that are happening, which are, amidst all this depressing stuff, it's just really the only sort of glimmer of hope that we have. So I think like every little bit of international scrutiny will help. So just anything that can amplify these protests, do whatever you can. And I still have some hope. I think things can move in a better direction. But yeah, let's all we can do is fight back and then see what happens.
Absolutely, I agree with that. That's a good sentiment to end on.
Yeah, I'd say so. Thank you guys both for joining me today and giving us some insight into what's going on in Modi land. Do you think that would be a fun theme park?
I'm sure my visa will be cancelled after this comes up. Because do you know that happened? Like, I don't know if you're still recording, but a guy who used to support Modi 5-6 years ago, his dad is Pakistani, mom is Indian, and his mom was a journalist who supported Modi. So he was like cautiously optimistic about Modi 6 years ago. And then a little while ago, he's like, oh, Modi hasn't done that great. And he wrote a Time magazine cover story about it. And his OCI card, which is Overseas Citizen of India card, kind of like an Indian green card, was cancelled. because they're like, oh, you said that. They didn't explicitly come out and say it's because you said mean stuff about Modi. They came up with some technicality, but the
Uh-huh.
timeline, the chronology was clear that he wrote a nasty Time magazine article about him, and his Indian citizenship or Indian green card, so called, was
Wow.
cancelled.
Do you want me to cut off your last name or something?
Oh no, I was kidding. I do everything with my full name, so they know about me already. So
Oh, you
that doesn't
troublemaker,
matter.
you.
Yeah,
Yes,
I'm the
I have been a
coward here.
troublemaker for a while.
Yes, you and me both cowards. High five.
Yeah, yeah. Also, since you brought that up, there was also a story of a German exchange student in an Indian university
Oh,
who participated in one of these protests and was immediately asked to leave India. He was basically deported. Um, so yeah, you if you're vulnerable, then you do have to be careful.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah,
oh
I
yeah.
think I did see something
And
about
then,
that.
so the new semester is just starting here, so in the US. So this is featuring prominently because we have to talk about like exchange student agreements and everything. And people who are doing that, because I'm involved with some of that in my university, people are talking about that we now need to put India in a different category than it used to be. Because in the past, India was thought of as being similar to, well, not exactly Western Europe, but generally thought of it being like a democracy. And now we're like, all right, maybe we have to treat it on par with China. So when a student goes to India, we have to tell them that just remember, it's like you're going to China. You have to
Mm.
remember you don't actually have any individual rights. You're making like a Faustian bargain going to that country and you might be kicked out. And it is because of this German student who was kicked out. Yeah.
And do you think like Modi supporters are feeling that the reputation is going down?
They are in denial. So I just posted a Twitter thread about this a couple of days ago that went semi-viral. So I've gotten a lot of pushback from them saying, no, 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 no. Modi has increased the stature of India worldwide. And I'm trying to tell them, no, the data doesn't support that. So
That's like my friend was saying about Trump, right? He's doing so well for the country. Ugh, I don't know what world you have to live in to think that, but
To take this in a slightly depressing direction again, I'm not sure, honestly, how much it even matters, like the reputation of the country. I mean, just look at what China is doing
yeah.
right now.
sure.
There's international outcry. Everyone's talking about it, but what can you do?
Yeah.
They're
But
just going
you
to keep putting people in concentration camps, and it's
but you'd
like
think that a country that touts itself as a liberal secular democracy would have some shame. China does not.
yes, but once the country's in the clutches of the Hindu nationalists, they don't even want to tout themselves as a liberal democracy, secular democracy. So I think I think right now they're in this
Yeah.
phase of
Secular is
denial.
an insult in India.
Yes, yeah. So I think right now they're in this phase of denial, but eventually they're just going to say, "Well, yeah, that's what we do. We don't care. We don't care what you think." Like China. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I just yeah.
Okay, so
I
biryani
agree.
then. Biryani is good.
Yes.
On that we can all
Biryani.
agree and be united. But I mean, it's a strange need to want to end on a positive note when there isn't a positive thing to grasp, right? We all have learned that, I guess, or at least I have, that we should try to uplift conversations. But sometimes we don't need to because the situation is so bad that we need to acknowledge it in all its horribleness in order to do something about it.
Yeah. Things aren't looking. Although I will say so. I think I'm like among the three of us. I'm probably the least pessimistic because one thing like I have been, I think is
That's just your male privilege.
well, yes, that there's that. But there's there's also the fact that the sort of protests that are erupting all over the world right now. I mean, it started in like Hong Kong, and there's Chile and Iran and everywhere.
Okay, guys, it's been wonderful to chat. As always, Gaurav, it was so nice to talk to you for the first time. Ravi, it was nice to chat with you again. And
Yes.
thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Thanks for having
third
me
time we
on.
speak, it's going to be positive.
You think so? We're going to have a third conversation about India, and it's going to be all
It's
about...
going to be all positive.
I hope so.
Yeah, well, on the other side, anytime you want me to bomb you out even more, I'm here. So, yeah.
Awesome.
If I had to plug, I would just say for people to go on Twitter and search Shaheen Bagh, SHAHEENBAGH. That is where the women have been sitting for like 6-7 weeks continuously, 24/7, and protesting this law. And they're just awesome. They're economically vulnerable people, so they don't come from a place of privilege, but they have become a very appropriate face for this protest. So amazing Muslim women sitting there, putting it all out on the line, and I hope they get more recognition and coverage in the world.
Sounds good. Till next time. Thanks for listening to another episode of Polite Conversations. You can support this podcast by sharing the shit out of it, making some noise about it, or contributing via Patreon. Patreon.com/Nice Mangoes. No E in mangoes. Also, you can follow me on Twitter @Nice Mangoes. If you want to make a one-time donation instead of a monthly Patreon one, you can do so via PayPal. nicemangoes.blog@gmail.com. Remember, no E in mangoes. If you've got an interesting story and would potentially like to be a guest, you can email me there too.